pictures of their own imaginings in the sky. They want to usher in the messianic age. They don't mind if it's brought on by nuclear age. They are so sure of their ability to outlive the utility of their bodies. But just remember that was the last thought in the brain of every suicide bomber and every hijack plane. Follow the guidebook for an afterlife. Which one do I try? Which one?
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Stay-at-Home Atheist podcast. I'm Jon and I am the Stay-at-Home Atheist.
And I'm Stacey, his wonderfully witty wife. See, I finally brought the cleverness.
See that? I knew you could do it.
Yeah, it took me a while.
Only 3 episodes.
Yeah.
The next one you'll just revert.
I'll be done.
Right. So the mission of our podcast is to challenge antiquated views on family values, particularly those in line with religious and conservative perspectives, and to promote secular and forward-thinking alternatives. But before we continue, I'd just like to remind you all that song you were listening to in our intro was Afterlife by the incomparable Shelley Siegel. You can check out her music on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or basically anywhere you'd find music.
You may have also noticed that we added some animation that was done by our dear friend Phillip R. Gunter.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Colonel. And if you guys are paying attention, that was actually here last episode.
Yes.
And we definitely just forgot to mention it, so we're very sorry. Anyway, why don't we go ahead and move on to the news? This episode, we have a bit of a controversial topic, but we hope you bear with us and maybe take something away from it that you hadn't considered.
We want to talk about James Gunn and his nearly decade-old tweets.
Okay, so if you haven't been following this in the news, then you might not know, but Disney recently fired James Gunn. He's the writer and director of the Guardians of the Galaxy series. He was on the slate to write and direct the 3rd film, but they've now fired him. And they fired him because some tweets he wrote about a decade ago have resurfaced, and they are less than polite. We're actually not going to read those tweets out. We don't think that it's really appropriate for
Doesn't do any good.
Yeah, exactly. It's not really what we want to have on here, but if you want to go check those out, maybe pause this podcast and go read if you haven't looked them up so you have an idea of what we're talking about. But they were definitely inappropriate. So basically, it kind of comes down to this. In 2008 and 2009, he wrote a series of tweets that he describes now as attempts to be like provocative. He wanted to be this provocateur, this humorist who said things that were like satirical. At least that's what he claims. Sounds pretty genuine, but I'm obviously not in the man's head. So fast forward like a decade, he's already been hired by Disney. Oh, I'm sorry, I actually backtracked to 2012. See, it's a little complicated.
When he apologized, yeah.
So, yeah, in 2012, he apologized for those tweets. He basically came out and said, look, I was trying something that obviously didn't work. These tweets are offensive and I don't stand by them. So that was only a few years after he wrote them. So fast forward to whatever year they actually hired him to do Guardians of the Galaxy. And I guess my issue is kind of about hypocrisy. If Disney really didn't want someone working for them who had written things like this, I mean, this isn't the first time it's happened, right? They should have maybe looked into it.
Well, and I think we're not saying that Disney doesn't have the right. Like, they absolutely have the right to do that. But there's more to the story than just what meets the eye, I guess is what we want to talk about.
Yeah, and so just to reiterate, it's not just that they have the right to look into the history of people they're going to hire, but they have every right to fire him if they don't like what they find out eventually. My concern really comes down to the fact that he hasn't been exactly secretive about having written these, and he addressed them in the past. So I guess it's like, at what point is it no longer something that's going to haunt somebody, right?
When do you do the research? When do you let it lie?
Yeah, and let's not forget that, Disney back when made things like Song of the South, and they have loads of very racist stuff. Look at the portrayal of Native Americans in Neverland and Peter Pan.
And, I love a good princess story when my daughter was growing up, but now looking back, there's a lot of things that aren't always so great in their stories.
So, they can come out and apologize for racist undertones in their previous works, but when a director they hired has apologized for his own concerning tweets, they don't give him credit for that apology. And that's, I guess, what I'm talking about when I say hypocrisy.
Look, we're not saying that they're good. It is a bad thing. These tweets were terrible. But there's the internet. It's a thing. Like, people are talking, people are posting. It's a reality.
Yeah, and I think the issue is, it's like, I see kind of memes that float around that's like, when people criticize what they'll call millennials and their tweets and the dick pics or whatever, pardon my language, but it's like, if we had that stuff when we were kids, who knows?
We would do the same stupid shit.
Who knows what absolutely ridiculous things we would have been doing on the internet that would come back to haunt us.
Right.
And yeah, I think it takes good parenting to talk to your children about how all of these choices may inevitably hurt them.
Right. It may be an impact down the line. But there also has to be some sort of a limit or a way to get past these things, because they're always going to happen. I
kind of think in like 10 or 15 more years, everybody applying for a job will have something awful they said on the internet. So like it won't be.
So what do you look at? Yeah.
So you just kind of have to look at the ones that are just like super bad and go, well,
current.
look, it's been a long time. They apologized. And that's kind of my issue. He's apologized. I'm not saying they should rehire him. I don't know. I don't think it's as simple as what either side is saying, but it's worth pointing out that this is a guy who's really done a bit of a 180, and he's focused a lot on trying to do the right thing. I agree with his politics and his views on a lot of things. So, maybe that's my bias showing, but I just don't see how this should be affecting him today, especially since he already copped to it.
Well, and I think one of the things that we keep thinking and talking about as being progressive and liberal is that you have to learn to change. You have to learn to progress, right? How do you become something new? And if we only always look at people's past and what they've done in the past, then how do you ever become something new, or how do you ever evolve from this person you once were, or this thing you once did?
Well, and I'm going to do a quick aside here because I'm not going to say his last name because I don't know if he'd be okay with being mentioned, but Stacey and I have a friend named Chris, and he posted a really, really good kind of write-up about his thoughts on the James Gunn issue. So I'm taking a little bit of what I'm saying here from him. So thank you very much, Chris, if you're listening. But one thing he mentioned that I think is important is that, James Gunn, these tweets by James Gunn were found, quote, unquote, or uncovered
Unearthed.
by conservative commentators who had beef with James Gunn. This isn't anything new, and I'm certainly not going to say that the left side of that equation doesn't do the same kind of thing, because absolutely they do. But as a result, this is kind of getting compared to the Roseanne Barr controversy that we recently had. And I think that's an absolute misstep.
Yeah.
And the reason is Roseanne said something extremely racist about a person of color
right now.
This wasn't something that we found out that happened 10 years ago. And
it's definitely not something she's grown from.
Well, exactly. And she has a history of saying vaguely or even outright racist things about people of color who she disagrees with. So this isn't the same thing at all. And I think it's important to recognize that, because you'll get a lot of this from the right, where they'll say, well, your bias is showing. You cared so much about what Roseanne said, but you don't care about what James Gunn said. But that's just not the case.
I do care what he said. It was bad.
If he had tweeted these things yesterday, I'd have called for his firing just like anybody else would have.
Absolutely.
And just a good thing to show that that's accurate is, and this is another thing that Chris mentioned that he and I agree on.
Totally agree.
Is when Kathy Griffin took those photos holding what appeared to be a severed head of Donald Trump, I thought she should suffer consequences, and she would agree with me politically. Just because I agree with her doesn't mean I think what she did was right. And if we are unwilling to look at ourselves and those of us who share our perspectives and hold them to the same standard, then we're not doing the right thing. But that's not what happened with James Gunn.
It's all about perspective, right? Everything has to be evaluated, and you have to make your own decision on how you feel. I guess the point we'll leave you with is, should every mistake be punished forever, or is there a point in time where it just doesn't matter?
Whew, all right, now that that's over, why don't we move on to something a bit more exciting? This episode's key discussion topic is going to be about our growing family. Stacey?
Yeah, so we have some major news. We've been working for the last couple months to get custody of our 2 nephews.
So, yeah, I have these 2 nephews who have struggled in school a bit and had some minor behavioral issues, and they just really need someone there all the time to be able to kind of direct them. And since I'm a stay-at-home dad, hence the name of the show, it just seemed appropriate that we should take temporary custody and try to help them kind of get over some of those issues. We've, taken them on vacation a couple of times. We had one of them for his spring break as kind of like getting our feet wet, testing the waters on how we were going to incorporate that dynamic into our family. And those occasions went really well. And so a week ago, we drove down to Florida on a Sunday, picked them up, and drove home from Florida on a Monday. It was an exhausting couple of days, 26 hours and 2 days, but it's done. And now we have 2 additional children in our family.
Yeah, so it's been still part of the honeymoon phase. It's kind of like vacation. Everybody's still having fun. It's summer break, so the kids are out. So they're all kind of acclimating to our home and to being part of the family. So everything's still going really well.
Yeah, we've had a couple of those bumps. The boys they're 13 and 14, so they butt heads a bit.
So there you go.
Yep, they argue, and our son is 12, so now we have a 12, a 13, and a 14-year-old.
Boys, all boys.
Fortunately, this is going to come out wrong, but fortunately, our daughter is moving out in August, so that will clear a little bit of space.
It's fortunate for her. She's very happy to be going.
So we want to talk a little bit about this because, well, one, it's just what's going on in our lives, but also bringing in new children into your family comes with a lot of interesting challenges and things maybe you weren't ready for or you weren't expecting. So while their parents aren't excessively religious or anything, the boys have gone to church quite a bit in their lives and haven't really had these kinds of conversations that we try to have with our children. So we've taken it upon ourselves to really take these lessons that we've learned through raising our kids in a secular way to try to teach them how to think, not want to think, as we are so fond of saying.
Yeah, and so it's been a lot of remembering to take a step back and not react to a question or give the same kind of answer that we would normally give to our children who have been through these discussions already. There's a lot of questioning and getting them to start to think a little bit differently and a little bit more logically and to question a lot of things that maybe they just haven't had to question in the past, or they haven't really had the time to sit down and think about those things.
One kind of positive area is that, this whole thing has been positive, but specifically relating to these conversations, is that while they were going to church a good bit, I don't think it was really about going to church. It was about going and being around the youth
outside
group.
And
they do activities.
Doing things.
It was just something for them to do. So there's not a lot of indoctrination that has happened. They've heard things that they questioned and thought sounded maybe not quite right. But for the most part, they've just kind of let it roll right off their backs. So that's been pretty positive. We talked a lot recently about, how to reason and what kinds of things are true and what kinds of questions you should ask of people when they tell you things are true that don't sound right to you. And very quickly, they've related those things to religion without having to be told that that's kind of what we're getting at.
Yep.
So I think that's a pretty positive sign. These boys are smart kids, so they just need some guidance and
a new environment.
Yeah, hopefully we'll provide that for them.
Well, it was interesting in the car ride. So we had, a long time with them in the car to have lots of discussions and for them to ask questions. And some things came up that we've already talked to our kids about. And, we were kind of refreshed on having those conversations, like about hell and dying. And we talked a little bit in the last episode about how Maddie really struggled with that when she was when she started to realize that she was an atheist. And we had some of those discussions in the car around, if I don't believe, what happens if I don't believe and I go to hell? I'm afraid to go to hell. And so even though they really haven't been indoctrinated into a church, just the little bits that they've heard and the little bits that they've been exposed to are enough to make them fearful. And it just reminds you that just that little bit, even at the tiniest conversation or the once a month going to church or to youth group or something like that, it's enough to plant that seed of fear in a child's brain.
Which, of course, I'm sure all of you already know this, but I find pretty deplorable. I was very fortunate to never really have that fear growing up. For whatever reason, it just didn't take. So I don't think I would have been able to properly talk to them about it had I not had this experience with our own children and coming into this family, this blended family. So it's been really good, I guess, education, right? I jump into this family. I've got 2 kids, and very quickly we have to try to explain these things to them. And it was like being thrown into the fire, feet first, Yeah,
definitely. And and you don't want to just start teaching them something different. So a lot of it is taking a step back and thinking about, how am I going to answer that question? How am I going to make sure that I'm asking them questions to get them to think through how they can come to terms with those questions?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think the most important thing you can do for a child is make sure that they understand that they're free to ask you questions. Because if they don't think they can come to you, then they're not going to.
I think this is a great time to segue into our next discussion. So typically we would talk about our discussion around atheism, but this time we're going to talk about some secular parenting resources. We've had to kind of refresh ourselves and go back over some of this with bringing in the 2 boys, and so we thought we'd share some of our favorites with you guys.
Yeah, last episode I think we talked a bit about how parenting can be really difficult when you don't have people to talk to who share your views. Like, we can't go to the neighbor who raised 2 children into adulthood and ask their advice because they'll say you should take them to church. Like, when you live, especially when you live in the South and in conservative religious areas in the Bible Belt of the United States, you don't have that option. So we talked a lot about different like online resources last episode and communities that you can join. But more than just that, there are all these really great forums for parents on the internet.
Yeah, so some of my favorites that I wanted to make sure I shared on Facebook is there's a Mothers Beyond Belief group, and it is a great forum to talk about anything that you have questions about with a secular group of mothers. Sometimes it's ridiculous, and sometimes it's just being able to vent in a group where you feel comfortable. So that's always been one of my favorites. We also, there are several that we've looked into, but haven't necessarily joined. But there are a lot of resources out there on Facebook. So don't be afraid to go join a group. Peruse some of the conversations, see what's going on out there, and figure if you want to stay or not.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not for you, then don't stick around. We just, Stacey just happened to have found the Mothers Beyond Belief page, which she really connected with. But that may not be the right page for you. But just a quick, Facebook search, you'll find a lot of different results of groups and pages you can visit.
And don't forget the meetup.com. There are meetup groups, trying to find people in your area. There are a lot of good websites out there. I think the American Humanist Association, they have a pretty good site. I think it's kidswithoutgod.com. And that might be one you want to check out and let your kids check out, because it's really information for different ages and things you can share with your kids.
Yeah, they have all these neat little like interactive games, like educational games, and your kids can ask questions, and it's separated like between
ages,
age groups, and then like parents click here and there's stuff for you, resources for you there. So we're not going to be able to hit every resource that even we have liked, because it's really hard to remember all the time, but these kinds of sites will often link you to other resources if you need them, so you should check them out.
And we mentioned last time the Parenting Beyond Belief. That's still a great book that I rely on and have used quite heavily. They have a website as well, parentingbeyondbelief.com. A lot of good information out there, some blogs and, some other things. So that's another thing to check out. It's not a long read, but it's a great read to give you some different insights and thoughts.
I think one of the issues people have when they deal with parenting is that there's not always a lot of great material for younger kids.
Yeah.
So very recently, and we're really, really pumped to be able to tell you guys about this, our friend Very Berry, that's her writer pseudonym, has written a series of books, or is writing a series of books. Yes. Though I don't want to hold her to something that she hasn't agreed to do, but I think she's writing more. But currently she has 2 books. They're called the Theodore Steele books, and they're really awesome secular lessons for young children. The first one is the best title of a book I've ever read. It's Theodore Steele and the Mystery of Mom's Missing Penis. You know what? I was going to give you a synopsis. I'm not even going to do it.
You don't need
should
it.
Just get the book and read it. It's a short read. It's a kid's book. And even though it's obviously primarily for the younger children, even my older nieces and nephews have really enjoyed it because it's kind of funny.
Yeah, and we bought a couple of that book and the most recent book, which is Why You Never Say Bleep to Grandma, which is fun. And we bought those and put them in our little local free library. So I don't know if you guys have any of those free libraries. I know they have a name, but I can't think of what they're called.
It's the little boxes where you can, just put in a book, take a book.
And somebody takes books. So we put some in there because we thought, why not let it all be something fun and different for people to read. So you should go check those out, especially if you have younger kids or younger nieces and nephews. It doesn't say anything about atheism or God or not believing in a God. They're just good books that give you some perspective without, sugarcoating some religious stuff.
Even though I don't really mind a book like that for kids that mentions religion or atheism, it's a really great way to kind of
share it with others.
Yeah, exactly. You send it to a family member who maybe believes in a God, and they read it to their kids because they don't really look at it that way. But it's definitely got a bit of that, I want to say atheistic perspective because it was written by an atheist mother. But
it's realism. It's what really happens. It's telling a story realistically from a child's perspective without, making up crazy stories as to why they shouldn't do something. It's having a realistic conversation with your child, even when they're a young child, and that's why I love the books.
You can, before we move on, because I'm going to totally forget if I don't do this right now, but you can check those out on Amazon.com, and we're going to put links to all this stuff in the description of this video or this podcast, so make sure you go down there and check those out. But I think the last thing we really want to talk about, and then we'll move on to some listener mail, because we actually got some this time. So there's a really cool resource called Camp Quest. They have camp locations all over the U.S. They have a couple international, yep. And our son just returned a few days ago from Camp Quest in South Carolina, where he had the best time of his life. Yeah. Stacey picked him up in the car, and he talked 90 miles an hour for 20 straight minutes, and then said, I'm going to recline the chair for a minute, and then was out cold for the rest of the drive. So they took a lot out of him.
Yeah, it did. And he really, really enjoyed it. And I think, if you're looking for a secular camp, a lot of times they're very hard to find. This is a great resource, great opportunity for your kids of all ages. They offer, for campers and then for volunteers to be supports. And, just kind of to plug the one thing he came home and talked about, and that was the Socrates Cafe, and that he was really excited about that. And that whole concept is kids bringing up topics they want to talk about and then having group discussions. And so it's really a great opportunity for your kids to go meet other like-minded kids and put them in an environment where they have fun, and there's a little education there too.
Before we move on to listener mail, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Kimberly Ellington, because we had never left our son at a stay-away camp, and she works at Camp Quest, and we already knew her, and she made us extremely comfortable with the process. And so we just wanted to say a very warm thank you, because it was wonderful for him, and we were extremely nervous.
Absolutely. So we did actually get some listener mail. We got a couple emails this week, but we found one that we thought would be a good, quick topic for discussion. So thanks to everyone who sent us an email.
The email we got that I wanted to talk about, I think I really want to talk about it because Stacey and I don't necessarily 100% agree, and it's a good parenting topic. We did touch on it a little bit last episode, but this will give us a little bit more of a deep dive into the topic. So we got a letter from Adam. Adam, again, thank you very much. I say a letter. It makes me sound like I'm...
Snail mail.
Yes, it makes me sound like I grew up without the internet or something. Shh, don't look up my age. So anyway, we received an email.
Definitely mine.
Right. We received an email from Adam, and basically he said he's not a dad yet, but he wants to be a dad. And he's already starting to think about the different kinds of things that it's going to mean conversationally to have children when you're an atheist, which is right up our alley.
Yeah.
So basically he said he'd been thinking a lot about parents who lie to their children, which is a little bit of a harsh word for it, but I kind of agree.
But it's true.
So his question was, is it wrong that I don't really want to tell my kids about Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy or whatever else? And like I said, we talked about this a little bit before, but I personally really struggled when Stacey and I first got together. Fortunately, the kids both kind of abandoned belief in Santa, which of course that then domino effects to all the other things. So I didn't have to worry about it for too long, but I'm really not a fan of telling your kids that there's a Santa Claus. And I think the reason why is it's kind of exactly like the God claim. You know, there's this person out there who knows when you're doing the right things, and if you don't, they're going to punish you. In this case, of course, nothing bad, by just not bringing you presents or giving you coal. which of course is ridiculous because nobody doesn't give their kids presents on Christmas for the bad behavior. So it's kind of like,
whatever.
It doesn't really mean anything,
Yeah.
which, hey, much like the God thing, which I think is really the root of my issue. It's exactly the same thing as saying, be good or God's going to punish you. Be bad, God, you know.
Well, and I think, you know, from my perspective,
Thanks for rescuing me. I just trailed off there.
You're welcome. I got you. Being a parent that wasn't necessarily at the point of completely dropping my religious belief, I kept kind of the charade up for a little while. But, you know, I believe that I didn't want to have it be something that injured my kids, right? So I never did the whole elf on the shelf, and I never really did a whole lot behind Santa, right? It wasn't this big charade of like writing the labels in different writing and all this stuff. But I think that if I had not come to the conclusion of leaving religion and proceeding through life with understanding this is the one you have, I probably would have pushed to keep the charade up a little bit longer. Like, Santa was a fun thing. It was something that, you know, you enjoyed as a parent with your kids. But I think, you know, when Maddie figured it out, it was kind of funny. And we hid it from Sonny for a little bit. But it was maybe a year before Sonny figured it all out on his own and came to us to tell us about it. And I think so, from my perspective, I'm okay with a parent deciding to do the whole Santa and Tooth Fairy thing, so long as when your kids start questioning it, that you don't try to keep it up too long or make unrealistic conversations around it.
You know, and like I said, we did definitely discuss this in the last episode, so if you want a more in-depth look at our view there, you can go check that one out if you haven't already. But one thing I want to touch on before we go ahead and wrap this episode up is that Adam had mentioned not ever wanting his children to feel like he had lied to them. And I think that's a really important thing, because if you are worried about that, then, you know, maybe it's just something you shouldn't do. But, you know, just a reminder is that you will potentially anyway have a partner, and you should definitely discuss these kinds of things with that person before you make a decision like this.
Yeah, there are consequences based on your decision and how your child is going to integrate into the community. So have a discussion. Love to hear more on it. And
I guess that's it, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for showing up. We appreciate it. Like I said before, you can send us listener mail at Jon, Jon, at stayathomeatheist.com. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to this YouTube channel, forward it to your friends. You can find us on Twitter, right? Share it. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, pretty much anywhere else. But yeah, I guess that's it, right?
I think that's it. Bertrand Russell once said, "The good life is one inspired by love and guided by knowledge."
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
Thousands and thousands are humming, the second coming's coming. The environmental responsibility is succumbing to the suicidal longing for paradise. Can't they see it's already before our eyes? All that makes us who we are, we find cannot survive without our mind. But you're so afraid to die, you're willing to sacrifice.